Welcome everyone, I'm gonna teach you how to deadlift in today's video. Oh wait, I forgot my outfit. I'll be right back. Okay, that's better. It is I, as you know, the deadlift queen. I'm gonna give you all my tips and tricks on how to have a beautiful looking deadlift, conventional, sumo, whatever it is, we're gonna cover it, that and so much more. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already, like the video, and let's go. Let's get right into it. Are you a sumo puller or conventional? I will go over both in this video, but if you're newer, you might be wondering which you're more suited for, and the differences are pretty simple. In sumo, your legs are gonna be wider and your hands are gonna be inside. With conventional, your legs are more narrow, hands are outside the legs. But because of those differences, your hips are gonna be the big differentiating factor. They'll either be closer to the bar in sumo or farther away in conventional. But also a huge change in the back angle. And that back angle is really important because conventional is gonna bias more of your back, erectors and hamstrings. In sumo, you're gonna work more of your adductors and quads. So when you're deciding which one you wanna do, take into consideration if any of those biases correspond with your training goals. Now, if you're powerlifting and you're just looking for which one you're most suited for, meaning which position will it be easiest for you to pull the most weight possible, then typically shorter, lighter lifters prefer sumo, taller athletes prefer conventional. That's gonna be a generalization, but longer limbs and short torsos tend to be conventional pullers. Sumo will favor shorter arms and a longer torso. So you get the benefit of having a shorter range of motion with sumo, but if you have hip issues, that external rotation in sumo could aggravate it. Now, if you are watching and you're a true beginner, I like to always start you at conventional and then give it some time before you switch, so you can compare those two with some experience. The last thing, if you happen to be training with any youth athletes, for some reason, usually prefer sumo. Like their back angle looks so much better with a sumo deadlift. Hello, it is I, yet again, the deadlift queen. Thank you for checking out this video. If you wanna ensure you're making progress, because I know you're here to learn how to deadlift, but also to become a badass at the deadlift. And the best way to do that is to follow a program. And let me tell you a little bit about something that I created called Stronger by the Day. It's the best strength training app out there. That's a fact. Just ask Sports Illustrated, who recently reported, and I quote, she said, "I've been lifting for 6 years and I started seeing way more progress once I started using Stronger by the Day." In the app, you can choose from our in-gym, at-home, or express track for shorter workouts. The app programs everything you need: exercises, weights, sets, reps, frequency, and of course the progression and the deadlift progression you need to get stronger by the day. We have over 400 exercises in our library with video and written demonstrations and tutorials like this one, so you know exactly how to perform each lift with perfect form, or as close to perfect as you're gonna get. The extensive library makes it so easy, so every movement can have a substitution. You can work around any injuries or equipment constraints, whatever they may be, and you never have to be confused on how to get stronger again. Join Stronger by the Day, start your free 7-day trial. It's free. Click the first link in the description, and I will see you there, my deadlift queen. Time to crown the next deadlift queen. This could be yours. If you think sumo's cheating, then this section's for you. Let's talk about conventional. We're gonna approach the barbell. We wanna make sure we're setting up with our feet about hip width apart. It could be more narrow. If you got a little belly, it could be a little wider. But you wanna walk up to the bar and stop when your shoelaces intersect the bar perpendicular. This gives my shins enough space so I'm not crashing into them, but I'm also close enough to the bar so it's not drifting away from me. After you have your feet set, you wanna allow the arms to naturally fall to your side. We're not ready to grab the bar yet, but when choosing a grip width, you want the arms to be, again, perpendicular to the floor. Don't go any wider, because a wider hand grip means that I'm gonna have to pull the bar a lot longer. You saw there, I automatically grabbed a mixed grip. You can do mixed grip or double overhand. That mixed grip will help your grip a ton, especially when it gets heavy. Our weakest link in the deadlift is usually our grip. If you think about it, these larger muscle groups back here are a lot stronger than my hands and my phalanges. So you can try mixed grip or even straps if you notice that your grip is what's holding you back. I wanna find a spot on the floor to lock my head in and just focus on it. It'll be a few feet in front of me on the ground. And then we're gonna use a 3-step setup. Here are the steps. 1 is the hip hinge. 2 is the knee bend. Then I'm gonna reach for the bar. That hip hinge can be really hard for beginners especially, but we're really just pushing the hips back. I like this little trick where you can take your thumbs and put them on top of your obliques and then your middle fingers on top of your thighs and just pinch together. In order for me to pinch, I need to shorten this space, so I need to bend and hinge back. I get that hip hinge down, then I'm gonna bend the knees slightly and I'll lower even more. And then after the knee bend, I still want the shins to be perpendicular to the floor. You wanna make sure that you're not getting into a knee angle like this. It's gonna be harder to pull it. So we hinge, we have our knee bend, and last we're gonna reach for the bar. That reach is where everything will start to come together, and we'll start to position so that shoulders are over the bar, and we'll also set our hip height, ensuring that from hip height to shoulders, our spine is in a neutral range. So now we found a good start position. There are two big components before the bar actually starts to leave the floor. We've got the wedge and the slack pull. The wedge is when we're kind of gonna use the weight of the bar to set our shoulders and set our hip position so that we're ready to pull and create some full body tension. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna tug on that bar just a little bit, like 10%, and my hips are going to lower, come closer to the bar, and my armpits, instead of shoulders over the bar, I'm gonna come back further because I'm sort of leaning to get my wedge, and I'll have more armpits over the bar. So the idea with the wedge is that we're setting the hips in a position so that they don't move until the bar passes the knees. When you don't get a good wedge and when you don't get a good starting pull position, you will see a lifter pulling and giving it their all, but the only thing that's moving is their hips. The bar is not moving at all. Whereas in a good wedge, you'll get into your true start position, you'll create tension and some good lat setting so that when you're putting all that effort in, the weight is actually leaving the floor. So other things to think about are setting those lats, like I said, and when your armpits get set over the barbell, you can think about packing the lats or depressing the scapula or even like squeezing an orange in your armpits. When you complete some of those like lat setting cues, you'll naturally be pulling back on the bar and creating more tension, and you might accomplish what we call the slack pull. The slack pull, or like hearing the click, is the moment where the sleeve of the barbell reaches the top of the inner circle of your plate, so it sounds like this. It's like this little bit of space that's stopping my effort from moving the barbell. So we need to pull the slack so that we don't have like a jerky deadlift where we're pulling the slack out and then finally pulling it. So to avoid that, you want to get your good wedge, get tension in the start position, pull like 20% effort, and then when you hear the click, pull 100%. It might take a while to get that timing, but try not to overthink it. That's a more advanced cue. If you're a beginner, you can worry about that later. Once the bar starts to leave the floor, think about pressing the ground away from you while also keeping the bar as close as possible to your shins. Those lat cues will help you do that. So as the bar starts to pass your knees, finally, you want to drive the hips forward like you would in a hip thrust to continue your lockout. A good deadlift at the top looks like knees locked out, hips fully extended. All right, conventional is out the door. Now we're ready for our sumo pullers. Obviously the biggest difference is gonna be our foot width. You wanna get in a pretty wide stance while still making sure that when your knees are bent in the start position, you want this shin angle to still be perpendicular. We don't have a physical cue like feet under hips like we do in conventional, so you might need to use some of the patterns of the knurling on the bar to understand where to set your shin. Still thinking about bar closeness, you will intersect your shoelaces more or less, and you might externally rotate the toes so that it's easier to activate your adductors and make space to get your hips close to that bar. Of course, your arms and hands are gonna go inside the legs to avoid crashing and also to give you a shorter range of motion, which is one of the benefits of a sumo pull. So since our grip is more narrow in sumo, you do wanna make sure that you're still getting some of that knurling. So I like to make sure that my middle fingers are on the edge of the knurling. However, there are some people who will do, instead of mixed grip, they'll do a double overhand hook grip. That's a more advanced tool, but it does help you get even longer range of motion because you have to pull a little bit less because your arms are a bit longer, and it is more advanced. Unless you're a more advanced lifter, I wouldn't go through it because it hurts your little thumbs, okay? But it is something that you can revisit as you get better at deadlifting and if you should choose to become a power lifter. All right, there's some of our setup. Now we've got the same start position sort of routine as conventional. I want you to lock your head in by focusing on a spot on the floor, a few feet in front of you, and then go through that 3-step setup. Legs are wide. 1, hip hinge, then our knee bend, then our reach. Now, our hip hinge cue, if we remember that, we'll take our thumbs on our obliques, middle fingers on the thighs, and then push the hips back. Now, your knee bend with sumo will be a lot greater. So when you start bending the knees, you'll notice my back angle becomes more upright and my knees are a lot more bent. So in this position, you'll be even closer to the bar when you complete the setup and the reach. Depends on every lifter, but step 1, step 2, and it's just a little bit to get down to that bar. Now that we found our start position, there are again the 2 big components before the bar starts to actually leave the floor. That's the wedge and the slack pull. I talk about it in conventional, similar cues here. Go back to that conventional section if you want more info on those both, but just to reiterate, the wedge is where we're gonna use a little bit of the weight of the bar and set our start position, create some tension, and the slack pull is where we hear that little click or click. Lat cues are the same. Pinch the lats, pack the lats, depress the shoulder blades, or like squeeze oranges in your armpits. Another one is like pretend I'm about to tickle your armpit. I know that's weird. But once the bar starts to leave the floor, you'll think about, again, pressing the ground away from you and keeping the bar as close as possible to your shins. Now, sumo is notoriously slower off the floor, so when this gets heavy for you in sumo, you need some more patience, and that is a skill that you can build. But as the bar starts to pass the knees, again, drive the hips forward, and you can think about squeezing your glutes like you would in a hip thrust. And in sumo, also think about squeezing the quads to fully lock out. So at the top, you should see knees fully locked out and hips fully extended. I do have a quick note on lowering cues, which seems like it shouldn't mean a lot, but I see beginners mess this up all the time. But when we're lowering down, I want you to initiate at the hip hinge with a controlled descent first. You can keep the knees soft, but you don't wanna like crash the bar into your knees or fully reverse your deadlift. It makes sense to reverse your squat. So a lot of people think, oh, I'll just do the same thing on the way down that I did on the way up. But it doesn't always work for the deadlift because you start to crash into those knees. So if you're a beginner, just think hips back first, control the descent, and set the bar down. All right, when you start to get more efficient with the deadlift, you might want to introduce some equipment to help you lift more. So to be clear, you can deadlift without any of these things, but I'll explain why some of them could be helpful. First up are shoes. What you want, and this one isn't the best option I have, is a flat, non-compressible sole. Okay, here's a good example of a really flat shoe that could work, not like those ugly dad sneakers that are super popular. Personally, I like to deadlift in my socks, and back in the day, if you were a sock deadlifter in powerlifting, the only thing that you could do were these really ugly slippers to get like a really minimal shoe. And now there are tons of brands who make shoes just for deadlifting or some lifestyle, but they are really, really flat. Okay, next is chalk. Chalk will help increase the friction between your hands and the barbell so that you're not losing your grip, especially when it gets really heavy. Most gyms will have a bucket like this or a nicer bucket version of loose chalk or a block of chalk. But if your gym doesn't allow you to use chalk, you can get away with something a little less messy with liquid chalk. All right, straps. We've talked about it before. The grip is usually your weakest link. If you don't want it to hold you back from your training, because you don't want these to hold you back from like effectively lifting for your glutes and your posterior chain, you can use straps, especially when you're working with higher volumes. These can be a lifesaver. The last one is a belt. This is the one that has a little bit of a learning curve. It requires some know-how, but like one session of understanding how to breathe and brace will mean that you can use this, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna breathe in, expand the torso. This rigid belt will not only help cue that expansion, but also to provide some external rigidity so that your back angle can maintain the same and you don't flex over the load. Your back is going to want to flex and you're gonna wanna have that round back, but a belt will help you keep your neutral spine position when it's used effectively. The 3 things you need to understand is how to expand the torso, not just belly breathing, but expand in 360 degrees. You'll need to understand the Valsalva maneuver and how to contract the core muscles or the brace. I have a video on how to use a belt that I'll link here for you guys. But before closing out the video, I want to give a quick note on another weakest link, which is the pelvic floor. Lots of women watch my channel, and men, everyone should know this, but if you've ever been to a powerlifting meet, you might notice stress urinary incontinence on the deadlift, especially in the sumo deadlift. So if you recall to my note about grip strength being the weakest link, for some women, instead of the grip, it's their pelvic floor. What's happening is since we exert so much pressure into our intra-abdominal cavity and combine that with a widened stance with sumo, with maximal weights, I mean, at powerlifting meets, they're lifting 100+%. Instead of seeing a form breakdown or an addition to a form breakdown, the pelvic floor gets so taxed that it can't do its job of holding in urine, right? So you're working so hard that it dysfunctions, you break down in form. So a simple strategy you can use is to activate the pelvic floor on exertion. So you want to pull up on the pelvic floor and ensure that you're not bearing down on the pelvic floor. Now, bearing down is that sensation that we do when we really need to pee and we finally get to a toilet and we like release. That is bearing down. So if you notice that you're kind of like pushing down on the pelvic floor as you're pulling up on the deadlift, you can adjust that. On that exertion, instead we want to engage the pelvic floor like a Kegel contraction, or what you do, like that feeling of if you really needed to hold in a fart or hold in a poop because you can't make it to the bathroom. So imagine those sensations. And if you're a guy, you might be tuning out now, but you also have a pelvic floor. And although it might not be as obvious when you're like sumo deadlifting, meaning like you don't see you urinating on the platform, you might see symptoms of hemorrhoids after lifting or associated with lifting. That would be the same kind of pelvic floor issue of bearing down and put that pressure exiting, right? So another strategy would be also to, instead of holding your breath, would be to exhale on exertion along with that pelvic floor lift. I wanted to add that in here because lots of deadlift tutorials don't talk about that. And that is going to be, especially for women of a certain age or women who have pelvic floor issues, it is going to be, like I said, your weakest link. So I feel like it should be incorporated in every single deadlift conversation that we have. Thank you to my royal subjects for attending my deadlift video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something new. I will pass the crown on to thee and coronate. Is that a word, coronate? Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Now you know how to deadlift. You gotta progress in the deadlift. That means a program that includes progressive overload, also considers your recovery, lots of variables of strength training. It is a science, and you need someone to kind of figure it out for you. It's not a rocket science, but why tackle it on your own when you can join the Stronger by the Day app for free? Get your first 7 days free. Come on, my deadlift queens. Join me on the Stronger by the Day app. I will see you there on Coronation Day.